All right, so now we're gonna work on making patterns. So there are some stock patterns that come with Illustrator, but you have to make your own for this project. But just so you can see what they are, you can get them up here in the swatches and go to library, and there's a whole patterns thing that you can play around with and adjust. And how you apply them is you just create a shape, and then you click on it in the swatches, and it didn't show up because I had my stroke on top. So you need to switch it to the fill. It has to be in the fill for it to work. We are gonna make our own though. So you're gonna draw a shape with the pen. Get rid of that. So I'm in the pen tool, which is P, and you're gonna make yours really interesting and awesome. Right now, I'm just gonna make something super simple. Okay, and then you're gonna adjust your anchor points and get a shape that you really love. I love Henry Matisse design, so these shapes remind me of his stuff. So it's good to think about what you're inspired by and what kind of shapes you want to create. And your pattern should have multiple shapes in it. So for this, I'm going to reverse that so there's one, so that's filled with no stroke. Okay, so you can make more than one shape, and you should make more than one shape. Maybe I'll make a little circle in here or something to make it a little more interesting. Okay, so you're gonna spend a lot more time on this, obviously. So what we do to make your own pattern is select the shapes that you've made. So I'm in V, the selection tool. I'm just dragging out a selection so they're all selected. And remember, before we were dragging stuff into brushes, this time we're dragging it into swatches. So I'm gonna get the swatches window open. Again, if you don't see it, it's up here, window, swatches. So I have everything selected and I'm dragging it into here. And it shows up, it kind of shows up wherever you put it. And if you have one, like I have my old flourish here that I really don't like, you can take it and drag it into the trash can just to clean up your swatches. So to apply the pattern, I'm gonna delete that. We're gonna make a shape. So I'm gonna make a rounded rectangle, and it's not showing up, right? Because the fill is black. So remember, it has to be in the fill, not the stroke. It's not gonna show up if it's in the stroke. My fill is on top, and then I'm selecting on the swatch that I created. Okay, so that's something that can get a little confusing. You might be clicking on it a bunch of times and it's not showing up, and that's just because your stroke is on top. So if it's applied to the stroke, it won't show up. I'll switch them here. See, nothing is showing up. So you need to have your pattern applied to the fill. Okay, so we can adjust this in a lot of ways, and we can do that just by right-clicking, transform, scale, and we want to uncheck transform objects and only transform the pattern. So uncheck transform objects, make sure transform patterns is selected. Always make sure your preview is selected, and you can click in here and you can do the up arrow or the down arrow, and you can go nuts with that. Let's try making a geometric pattern in case you want to make one of your patterns a little more geometric. So I'm just gonna delete this, and I'm gonna show you an easy way to do a geometric pattern. So I'm gonna make a rectangle. I'm coming into my regular rectangle tool, and I'm gonna hold Shift to make it a square. And I do not want it filled with my pattern, so I'm gonna come and click on my fill color, come into my swatches, and just make it a solid color. So I want to make this like a 3-dimensional cube shape. So here's an easy way to do that. So I'm gonna first rotate it. So I'm still in my rectangle tool, but when I come to the corner, my cursor changes to a little rotation, and I can hold Shift and rotate and just click and drag a little bit, and it automatically rotates it 45 degrees, just to make life easy for us. And then I want to put it in perspective so I can start building my cube. So I'm selected on it with the direct selection tool, which is V. I'm right clicking, going to transform scale, and I want to do non-uniform. I was playing with this before, so it's changed. So I want the horizontal to be 100 and the vertical to be 50. So we can see where the original square was, and then we can see how it's transforming into kind of a perspective shape. Okay, so that's one. And then I'm gonna make another one by holding the Alt key and dragging out a copy. And see those pink lines? Those are our guides that really can help us line stuff up, especially when if you wanna make really clean, precise geometric patterns. So if you don't see that, you go to View and just make sure Smart Guides is on. That's how you get those pink lines if you don't see them. Okay, so now we can use the pen tool to build the other two sides of our cube so it can look like it's in perspective. So I'm coming into the pen tool, which is P, and the important thing about this is that nothing is selected. So just make sure to click out of it and make sure nothing is selected. And then the pen tool is automatically gonna read when you're lined up with anchor points. So the anchor points are serving as a guide. See where it says anchor? So I can make a new shape based off of the shapes that I have here. So I'm clicking on my anchor points, and I'm making this side shape, making sure I'm clicking when it says anchor, and then I'm closing it off. And I'm pressing V and selecting on what I just made, and I'm gonna double click on my fill swatch here and just make it a little darker so it looks like it's going back in space. And so we can tell the difference. And then I'm coming back into my pen tool, P, and I'm gonna make the other side. So again, I'm waiting till it says anchor, and then I'm going to this anchor point. So we're using these guides to help us make our shapes faster. And then for this one, I'm gonna press V to select it, and I'm gonna make this one even darker just to differentiate between the sides. Press OK. And there we have a cube in perspective. I'm dragging my selection, so just those three shapes are selected. Since this is hidden, we don't need it. And this is an important thing. This is when I talk about a clean design, having this extra hidden shape in there is not a clean way of working. So you just want to get rid of that. You don't want extra stuff, and like with the flourishes, you don't want things sticking out in funny places, because especially if you're making a pattern and we're using this over and over again, you want it to be super clean. We can drag this, once you get it the colors, everything you like, we can drag this into swatches and it will make a pattern. So let me just delete that. Let's make a shape to fill it in. And remember, we're in the fill, and we just click on that. And again, we can come in and go to transform and scale. And we want to come to uniform, and we want to uncheck transform objects. We just want to transform the pattern. And we can come in here and you can make it smaller. You can do whatever you want with that. So that's the beginning of making patterns. Now there's a lot of options within the pattern itself that we can start to work with. So when you double click on this pattern in the swatches, so I'm in the swatches, I'm double clicking, and we get into this pattern options up here. You can change the name of it. So you can call it blue cube, whatever you want. And you can change the tile type. I like this one for this brick by row is cool. And you can see how it's offset. Now it's offset as half, so it's halfway in between. And you can see by a fourth, that's less. So you can play around with that. This really depends on what your pattern is and what it looks like. This isn't gonna look like anything right now. What else can we do? We can change the width. So we can click in here and do the arrows. See how they come closer together? And once stuff starts overlapping, then you have these overlap options that you can play with. You can change all this. So if you want them actually overlapping, and you can think, this is a great time to think about negative space. So now the white in the background, and if you had it on another surface that had a color, is making a really cool pattern as well, this zigzag pattern. So definitely think about your negative space. You know, you can change the brick by column, but if you come into the hex by column, you get this little option here. See how the blue outline changed? And there's this tool up top. It's the pattern tile tool you can click on, and then you get to move these sort of anchor points, and you can adjust how much how close and far away they are. So you can really more intuitively and more visually, this just depends on how you like to work, move stuff around. So there are so many options within this for you to play with. And then once you get stuff overlapping, that's when you really want to test out the different options. And so the one that's a different color is the one that we're working on and we're affecting. So you can uncheck this so none of the ones around it are dimmed, and you can also make the ones around it dimmed more, so it's easier to discern what we're working on. But if you want to see what it will look like, that's what it'll look like. The pattern will actually look like when you have this checked, so you can just really be working on the one that you're affecting in these options and not get distracted. Okay, so I'm in the more organic pattern. I've double clicked on it in the swatches, and we can make a background with this. So I'm going to click on the rectangle tool. I'm in my fill, and I'm going to grab a color and make sure your show tile edge and show swatch bounds. You want to make sure that's checked. If that's unchecked, you won't be able to see the end of it. So this is like, the swatch is like one tile of your repeating pattern. So I'm drawing a background, and it's going to show up in front. We can right click, arrange, send to back, or you can do the, draw behind thing. And that's how that looks. I'm just going to make sure. I think that looks cool. And you can change the color, you can adjust stuff, and then when we come out of it, we can draw another shape. And that will show up in there. And then of course we can transform, scale, and you can make it smaller or bigger. And you can also transform, and you can rotate. So you can rotate, make sure transform patterns is selected, and you can rotate it around. Maybe we should scale it down first. So transform, scale, press OK, and then I'm going to right click, transform, rotate. Just make sure that patterns is selected, and you can kind of move this thing around, or you can change the number and rotate it around. So you have a ton of options within that. Okay, now we are going to make a seamless pattern. So I'm just going to select this stuff and delete it. And we're going to use the blob brush to do that. The blob brush is underneath your paintbrush. If you right click, it's the blob brush tool. All right, so we're going to make a seamless pattern. So it doesn't have like the tiling grid thing like we just did. It will be connected, so it will repeat over and over again and look totally seamless. And the cool thing about the blob brush tool is it makes shapes as long as they're overlapping. So let me just show you really quickly what it does. So I drew all those lines that are overlapping, and then I'm drawing some over here. Then I'm pressing V to select. Now this is all grouped together as one shape. So the blob brush, you can kind of paint shapes in a really cool way. I'm just deleting these. So to change the brush size, use the left bracket to make it smaller and the right bracket to make it bigger, and that's just a really easy way to work. Okay, so you can make whatever you want for this. I think it's good to have some kind of inspiration. Maybe you want to do something that's like cracked glass or spider webby. You know, you can think about whatever your inspiration is. Maybe I'll do black. So you can start making a shape. And it can be totally random too. It can really be whatever you want. So you're going to spend a lot more time, you know, adjust your brush. So some lines are bigger and some lines are smaller. I did one earlier that was like inspired a little bit by coral. So you can think about shapes in nature that you're inspired by. You can think about like maybe a stained glass window or a mosaic. One thing you do want to do is get these lines looking clean, because remember it's going to be repeated over and over again. So zoom in, make stuff look great. You'll spend some time getting this looking the way you want it to, adjusting the brush and doing the right bracket to make a bigger brush, and maybe making it into kind of a rectangle or a squarish shape, but it can really be whatever you want. And you can have some lines at the end kind of trailing off, because we're going to connect them together in the options. So you want to give yourself some space to work with. Just remember with the blob brush, stuff has to be connected. So I'm holding the space bar to move around. I knew over here that looks kind of funny, so you can just kind of draw over it. So I'm pressing V and selecting it. It's all one. You can move it around and make sure it's all one. And then I'm going to move it in, drag it into my swatches, and double click on it to get the patterns option. Oh, one more thing. Let me just do Control Z to get out of there. There's another way to make it a pattern. You can just select on it and go to Object, Pattern, Make, and then it takes you into there. So that's just another way of doing things. There's always a million ways. Okay, so now the gray is, if you zoom out, Control minus, you can see what it'll look like, and you can continue to use the blob brush in here and start connecting things. And for this one, you're using what's in the tile, you know, in the swatch that you've created, and you're adding to that, and you can go out of bounds. So you can connect, and maybe this needs to be bigger. So you didn't have to make it perfect the first time. You can start connecting these, and you can start to see what it'll look like. And I'm holding, you know, and maybe this needs more over here in this corner. It's going to connect to that. And then again, keep making the brush bigger and smaller to make stuff make sense and look good. but you can really spend a lot of time here adjusting your shapes. And just playing around. So what I like to do is I keep zooming out, making sure it looks good, and connecting stuff. And let's get this stuff all connected. So you just want to pay attention to the corners, and you can kind of make the brush smaller to transition it in. Everything is connected to something, so that's what's going to make it completely seamless looking. So we can't tell where one tile ends and another begins. So you definitely want to overlap, because you can see over here in the gray where I'm drawing, you won't be able to tell the overlap when it's in the actual pattern itself. Okay, this is really fun. I can't not stop doing it. Okay, let me zoom out, Control minus minus, and you're gonna get yours looking the way you want it to. You can always uncheck the dim to see how it looks. That looks pretty cool. So it's saved. We can go back here. I'm gonna press V and just delete that. And now you can draw with your pen tool. You can think about drawing different shapes, like maybe you wanted to make a frame, or you could make this, you can really make anything. I'm just gonna do something really super simple to show you. So I want you to make some complex shapes, make a design where your pattern is filled into it. Okay, let's do that. Okay, so we have the fill here, fills on top, and we're selecting the pattern we just created. So that goes in there. So we can, of course, I'm pressing V, we can transform it the way we've been doing. You can transform the scale. You know, you can make it super small, you can make it really big. Totally gonna depend on yours. I wanna show you how to layer up your patterns and change the color and the background in an easy way. So I'm gonna lock this background just on the layers panel. Again, if you don't see it, it's in window. Just by pressing the little lock there, and I'm gonna make 2 new layers. So layer 2 and layer 3. On layer 2, I'm going to draw a shape. I'm gonna draw a star, and my pattern was in the foreground, so it automatically filled it in there. And then I want to copy it, and I don't want to drag out a copy because I want to copy right on top of it so I can adjust it so they're layered on top of each other. And I think when you watch, you'll see why I'm doing that. So I'm going to do Control C to copy, and then I'm going to go into layer 3, make sure it's selected. So see, I was on here clicked on the circle, and there's that little box here. It indicates that that's selected. So I clicked into layer 3, and that box is still there, which we don't want. We want to get all the way into layer 3, no box on layer 2. And then I'm going to come to Edit, Paste in Place. So paste in place is going to paste it right exactly where I copied it from. So you can't even tell that it's there because they're 2 of the exact same thing right on top of each other. Okay, so I want to change the background color. So on layer 2, I'm selected on that. I click the little circle, so I see that layer 2 is selected with that box there. And I want to click the fill color, and I can just make it whatever color. So now there's no pattern in the background, but we were just making the background the exact same shape because it makes our lives easier. And then I can select on layer 3, and I can come into the appearance panel, and I can go to the opacity, and I can turn that down. You know, it turns kind of gray. You can also, if you're a Photoshopper, you can multiply it, and you can affect the layers this way, which is kind of cool. There's all different ways. So you can play around with all of that. So that's a way to easily transform your colors and your opacity and adjust your pattern in a way that totally changes it.